Well, all right, everyone. Good afternoon. Might as well get started. Just let you know that this will be recorded and made available later for you if you so desire. I'll also make the slides available to you as well. Hi, my name is Kevin Gunn. I'm coordinator of digital scholarship at Catholic University of America Libraries. And today I would like to provide you with an overview of best practices, tips, and good advice before you decide on whether to work on a project or not. This comes from impetus for this webinar comes from a lot of practical experience working with students and faculty and that. So I sort of want, to give you a best overview of how to avoid a lot of problems. So can come your way when or if you decide to work on a project. So what are my sources for doing this project? Basically, I took a course on project development. It was actually a week-long institute with two scholars, Jennifer Giuliano and Simon Appleford. They did it through the Humanities Intensive Learning and Teaching at MITH, which is located at the University of Maryland College Park. And that was back in 2014. They do have a website up. I don't think it's been updated for a few years now, but it's called devdh.org. And at that time that I took the class, they'd already been involved in about 50 projects and all that. So they had a lot of takeaway good advice to use. So I've incorporated a lot of their good advice tips into this presentation. I also created and teach the Digital Humanities course at COA. It's in the Department of Library and Information Science. So I've been doing that since 2015. So I'm always looking for new ideas and that for the particular course. And I let my library science students know about the particular tips in that. I don't focus, I don't exclusively have library science students. I've had history students, Greek and Latin students, poli-sci students take that course as well. So there's a lot of overlap there and interdisciplinary work involved in there. And last thing, just my personal experiences working on digital humanities projects with students and faculty at COA. So I've done a number of interesting things. For example, spent a weekend with a faculty member and a number of other scholars from around the world on an NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities, Digital Humanities grant. And our job that weekend was to create a thesaurus for a particular project. And that was very interesting to work on. I've been involved in an oral history project for a Christian community outside Detroit. That was field research, conducting interviews, that sort of thing. So you learn by doing a lot of the time, and which has advantages, but it also has disadvantages, which I'll outline as we move along. So should I embark on this project that you may have in mind? Well, let's see. So, my experience has been that, people will begin a project because it's a cool idea and they'll select a digital technology. They'll come across something. They'll say, hey, this is really applicable to my project. And then they'll begin working on the project. And then quite often what happens is they'll run into problems. At that point, that's when I get a phone call where someone drops into the office. So, for example, I had a student who was a PhD student in early Christian studies, and she was working on inputting data and text into an Excel spreadsheet. Excel, very popular when you use it type thing. So she was about 2,000 rows in. Then she realized this simply was not a good idea. So she came to me and asked, what are possibilities that we could work through? So it sort of came out from nowhere. So I wasn't able to help her all that much with regards to that particular question there. So she was about halfway through. So she decided she's going to just slog her way through to the bitter end. So I hope things worked out with her. Another case, I had a faculty member who had worked on a WordPress blog, and she had a great project going with a particular important journal that was not had not been indexed by the major indices. So she had been doing that, but she needed something very specific at one point, a Zotpress application. It's called to put into the WordPress, and And the thing is, I wasn't able to help her specifically for that, but I knew a guy who was able to do it in a couple of hours. So a lot of times I can help people, sometimes I cannot, sometimes I have to refer them to someone else. So you have a lot of situations like that that can arise. So what we're talking about here is project development in a larger sense. Today I just want to go through and give you an overview of the process. So here's the general outline I'll walk through. Starting off with what is a good idea for a project. How do you build your team? What sort of concrete products do you want to get out of this project? What's the technologies that you're going to use to work on your project, but also to manage your project? You also may be involved with students. Maybe you're working by yourself, in which case this won't be applicable to you. But if you are bringing in other people, such as students, then you have certain obligations and duties that you have to be aware of. It's good to work on building your first work plan. That includes a budget design. If you're reaching out beyond your particular group to other institutions or other groups, that sort of thing, you may want to look into charters, agreements, and handshakes. And then there's a question about branding and marketing your project, getting the word out. And then all about the problems. I'll go through and give you a number of examples of problems that you may come across that you've never thought of, I guarantee you. So it'll give you something to think about as we move forward. And then last, I'll wrap up with a quick overview of grant funding. So it's always good to get some money in that. So starting at the beginning here. So what is digital scholarship? It's the use of digital evidence and method, digital authoring, digital publishing, digital curation and preservation, and digital use and reuse of scholarship. So it all sounds very complicated and sexy and that sort of thing. But when you really think about it, you take out the digital, what are you dealing with? You're dealing with scholarship. It's the use of evidence and method, authoring, publishing, curation, preservation, use and reuse of scholarship. That's all it is. In fact, Clifford Lynch, who's the executive director of the Coalition of Networked Information, said, basically digital scholarship is essentially scholarship. When people ask me, Kevin, what is digital scholarship? I said, it's scholarship done digitally. So I just move the words around. So that's the point that you should be focusing on, that what is your scholarship that you hope to contribute? So what's a good idea for a project? Well, maybe we should ask what a project is, start with that. So what is it? It's a sequence of related activities. So you've got an idea, you're going to gather some data, you're going to analyze that data in whatever way, and then you're going to report the results out and that sort of thing, disseminate your results, your conclusions. So there's a sort of a process there. You have a question, issue, or problem. Ideally, you want it to be original in nature. So you're actually making a contribution. You're going to have to get resources, acquire resources, develop resources as you move forward through your project. You are going to have an audience and other participants. So who are you doing this project for? It's a very good question. And then, as I said, the results in a product. Maybe you're creating a website that comes out of it. Maybe you're going to get a research paper that's published. So that's always want to have the end product in mind. Big part of project development is project management. So project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet project requirements. So you should be aware of the Project Management Institute, and they have a lot of great information on their website that you can go check out. So what are examples of projects here? So you can talk about a whole bunch of different things like events, having a 2-hour workshop or something. Perhaps this webinar can be an example of a project. You have meetings, workshops. You can do a conference, create a conference over several days, or a symposium over a day or two. What is it that you're creating, what type of research that you're putting out, what is your analysis, what are you investigating, what sort of experiments are you running, and of course the whole idea of development. So essentially what it comes down to is that you're telling a story, writing an argument, answering a question, developing a theory, and that's scholarship essentially. So how do you go about it? Well, you're going to need sources and materials. So, what are the sources that are available to you? So, example, if you're doing a text analysis project, do you have access to scanners? Are those scanners OCR capable? Do you have access to the texts? How many texts? I had one student who wanted to scan 100 books for a project for a semester. And, I just had to talk them off the ledge and say, okay, who's doing the scanning? What books? Where's it going? So I gave him an idea how long it's going to take just to scan the material. If he expects the library staff to do it, well, that's going to be problematic. So I encourage students and faculty to come to me, ask questions, and I will ask some questions back just to give you a sense. It's all about managing expectations, I've found. So just to let you know. So, you're looking at the scarcity and abundance of material, are they primary, secondary sources? What's the feasibility of it? And then the quality and complexity of what it is that you're working on. So how do you know it's a good idea? Well, it has an audience of more than you. It's a pretty good start. It challenges disciplinary assumptions. It innovates a new method or approach. It clearly elucidates its own value, and it improves on previous efforts. So if you are doing any sort of scholarship, you're writing a paper in that, and you meet these sort of expectations, well, that's a paper that's going to be published in a peer-reviewed journal, for example. Well, it's the same with a digital scholarship project. You're going to have something that's that people want to go to and to use and to cite and all that. So that is something that you always want to focus on, so the scholarship. So on the other side, what's a bad idea? So thinking that only your opinion or work on the project matters, starting a project without considering your commitment to it, that's a big one, let me tell you. You think it takes X number of days or months or whatever, and it can go much, much longer. I'll show you how you can sort of get your way out of that. Looking at someone else's project, attempting to duplicate it wholesale. So you can have a project that focuses on a particular geographical area, and it looks very interesting, all that. And you say, what, I want to apply this project to my own geographical area. Well, that's fine, but you have to go back to the original questions. What is it that you're trying to show, to prove, to demonstrate that hasn't been proven before? So you always have to reorientate yourself back to your original idea. You also, not having a clear measure of what is considered a project success. So, you have to feel somewhat happy, satisfied of walking away from the project at some particular point in the future. So it's a good idea to develop an idea of statements of innovation and significance. So, you want to explain in terms of comprehension to a general audience what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And you want to talk about the significance of your proposed project. So your significance can consist of, how does it contribute to a particular discipline or field? How does it contribute to the humanities or sciences more generally? Or, what is the impact of your research, right? What is going to be changed by the existence of your project? It's a good way to look at it. For innovation, you're looking at creating something new and you can prove it. Offering an interesting approach to tackling a problem. There could be a technical innovation that you've created. You can make use of existing technology in a new way. is the project collaboration that in itself is innovative. So two different groups or two different universities in two different countries, for example, working together on something. Or you can address a longstanding humanities or science issue in a new way. So there are different ways of building this scholarship. So the next step is when we talk about building your team. Where do I go? How do I start from there? So, how do you know you're ready for a team? So it's a very good question to ask. So as an individual, your own limits have been reached, intellectually. Maybe you don't have an expertise in a particular field or discipline. You need input from that area. Technically, you don't have the skills to do the project. And infrastructurally, you don't have an organized group of people working on something. You're just by yourself. So at that point, you need to sort of scale up. So if you're staffing your project, you're probably going to have to consider a number of these groups, from administrators to project managers to technical staff, visual outreach. If you're creating a website, you're going to need logos, and you need a cool looking website. You're going to need finance, probably, if you're managing grants and that sort of thing. Who's going to be handling that? You're also going to need education and outreach, so possibly specialists and trainers that you may want to consider. So when looking at administration of this, you can have the project director. Usually that's the principal investigator, or or if there's more than one principal investigators. And usually they have separate tasks and duties than a project manager. Project director will look at the overall view of the project, whereas the project manager will look at the day-to-day workings, making sure everyone's doing their job properly, that sort of thing, making sure that resources are available. These different positions can have very different responsibilities. So project team principles, who you bring on your team is going to impact you quite greatly. So the type of staffing you choose will affect your project's capability and its obligations. So if you're doing a website project and you have a web developer, for example, then you're going to be much stronger than someone who's just starting to learn web development moving forward. So that can impact your project in terms of how quickly it moves forward. The more part-time staff you have in a project, the more coordination that is going to be required. More people, more cooks, that sort of thing will involve more work. And then there's the issue of the split attention problem, having perhaps too many things on your plate at that sort of time, trying to manage different scenarios in that. So where exactly do I get my team members from? Well, they can be from your department, like colleagues, IT staff, administrators, your college, your university, excuse me, like the IT staff, people who work in contracts and grants, the campus IT folks, so system administrators, programmers, data folk as well. Don't forget the libraries. You have subject specialists, librarians, and programmers there that may be interested in working on a particular project. You should be aware that they don't have to come from your campus. They don't have to be academics, and they don't have to be in your particular field or discipline. So you want to be very, open to finding people who can do particular tasks, who can handle particular duties and responsibilities well. That's the big thing. Now, the big question too is, how do you get them to say yes, right? So you want to have conversations with prospective team members and ask them, do they already provide this service, or work, are they paid or unpaid type thing? It's very easy, for example, with the Zot Press, I had my colleague already knew how to do a lot of this stuff. So it took him, a couple hours, that was it. So if you know the right person, it does help to ask them, and they'll be more inclined to share their expertise. Have they said that they want to do this type of thing, right? Strategic plans. People who are enthusiastic about working on a particular project, they're always worth their weight in gold. So you always want people to have enthusiasm. What do they need for promotion? So what does their boss care about? So that's the self-interest principle. Nothing wrong with that. Definitely can have projects that help. If you're a faculty member on the tenure track, it can help you move forward in that way. So also, lastly, there's the old friendship discount. Do you know someone already, and they'll be more inclined to help you on the particular project too. So for each member, identify what they will contribute. Have a clear statement of the value of the project to the partner, and then determine their pattern of engagement moving forward. So that's something that you can talk with each member about. Have a group meeting as well. Have the project manager delineate the tasks that need to be involved, coming together. So what concrete products do you hope to get out of doing this project? So, each project transforms the questions and opens up new sources, right? So if your research isn't going to change anything, then why are you doing it at all? So it's very important to ask that question. Your idea for research might be the product of an earlier one. So you're building on something that came before, which is always can be useful. And at the end of the day, failure is a product. You've tried a lot of different things. You've worked the project. You can write a paper, if nothing else, a research paper saying we tried all these different things, we still didn't get the results we wanted, and send it off to a peer-reviewed scholarly journal and get it published. I'm the editor-in-chief for a particular journal, and I just received a paper that we accepted dealing with a particular instructional plan, and it was basically sideswiped by the COVID-19 pandemic, but they still worked on it. They still worked through it. They acknowledged that they did not achieve the results that they wanted to get, but it was still a learning tool. And I think that's the real onus. Can people learn from the work that you have done? So types of product you coming out. Well, you've got a bunch of things you can do. So blog posts, press releases, code, websites, tweets, lessons, apps. You can build books, articles, peer-reviewed, presentations. There's all these different sorts of products that you can create. One of the things that you can do with regards to your products is attract them. So for example, if you're writing blog posts or something, you want to look at the frequency of retweets, for example, and repostings, and you can keep track of that through Twitter Deck or these other platforms. You can look at the location, the distribution network of where your project's going, how the thing is cited, how often your project is cited in other sources, the engagement, the comments, visits that you've had, Google.com analytics, Google Scholar, the whole idea of citations, bibliometrics, altmetrics, all that sort of stuff helps you, gives you a sense of how your scholarly work is making an impact in your field. So those are things you may want to consider as well. So you can always keep a running Excel document moving forward with the project, seeing how often things are being cited and that sort of thing. You also could provide a copy of your reports to stakeholders, annually or at the end of the project. That lets them know that you are having a scholarly impact out there. And then what you also want to do is make sure that you do have someone on your team who's tracking the products and tracking the success of the products. So reporting your projects, you want to report to your team members what's going on. your stakeholders, whoever the particular audience is, your administrators, your funders, especially your funders, if they're funding it, you're going to have to probably write a white paper at the end of it and tell them how you succeeded. And you're also your boss, your chair, your dean, whoever is monitoring your work. So you want to be very transparent in doing your reporting. So technologies to work and manage your project. So going back to my original early Christian studies student who was using Excel, it may have been worth her time to check out this particular website called Tapor3. And what is, it consists of a whole range of tools that that can be useful for you. Some of them are free, some of them are you have to pay something, some are others where you have subscriptions, others are free to a certain degree. You pay for later material or whatever. So there are a lot of interesting tools out there that you can use. You'll notice under categories, all the different types of activities that you can focus on. So if you're doing analysis, it's good to check on analysis and see what different products are out there. So doing a little bit of homework beforehand, selecting your digital tool, if you will save you a lot of time in the long run. I encourage you to check out this website. It's pretty awesome. So you want to evaluate your needs. What do you want to do? How much time you want to spend doing it? What is my budget? Open source, commercial. Who will be the primary user of your product once it comes through? What has someone else done this before? You can reach out to them. Does your campus have an existing solution or resource that you can use for your project? Do I have to build them from scratch? So that's always an important question too. If you're going to be building something from scratch, you're going to need someone who's an experienced IT developer moving forward. And that could possibly cost you some money. So we'll talk about budget in a bit. All right, so many projects, digital scholarship projects out there involve working with students. So there are things you need to know, both as a student and as a project director, a project manager, a project investigator. What obligations and responsibilities do you have? So first thing I always tell, faculty in that is that, remember, students are not free labor. So you do have obligations to them to have them do meaningful work so that they are making a contribution, and that possibly that's something that the work they're doing that could be put on a CV sometime in the future. So it's always looking at the next best thing, so to speak. They're not there to do the scut work, the so-called dirty work that's involved in quite a few digital scholarship projects. Students should absolutely have clearly defined roles of what it is they're doing and what their expectations are. And they should be seen as collaborators. They are working with you on something greater than all of you. So you should be treating them as collaborators. So as the project manager, the project investigator, you have to ask some really good questions. So is it going to take longer to teach the students that it would be a particular task, or would it be better for you to hire a professional? So that's something that you sort of have to balance. Is the quality of work you need going to be met by the students? So you don't want to put in a student who's just learning web development, for example, into something that requires actually experience of a few years, web developer having a few years experience. So sort of setting them up to fail on that point. So you have to consider these types of questions. So, are you willing and able to manage student issues? So for example, most common ones are non-standard work hours, limited notice for vacation, exams, and personal issues. So, that's just life as a student. And you have to be sure that, as much as you plan and budget, sometimes life just happens. So And what last you're looking at possibly pay rates and salaries. So for undergraduates, it's at least $12 an hour. That number I'm sure has probably changed to advanced professionals that can be in greater than $60 an hour. And I'm sure that number has gone up too in the past year or two. You have to consider intellectual property as well. Any work completed in the classroom is the student's intellectual property. So you need to get students permission to distribute their work beyond the classroom. FERPA states that identifiable information about a student cannot be released to any third party without their consent. So you have to get the student's consent, and you can do that a number of ways. One is a very typical waiver, such as this one here, where you just fill out the name. They said this is what is expected, and giving the permissions, called the identity clause, essentially saying, I give permission to use this project. You could go into great more detail here. I won't read this out, but you can see it can be quite detailed about how the information is going to be, the work is going to be processed, evaluated, viewed, disseminated, archived, all of that moving forward. So some things to consider, what are the Creative Commons or other licensing rules for what you're working on? For example, must the student work always include student citation ad infinitum forever? Well, it depends on how your setup is at your university. If it's a particular project, then you can have a page where you list the team members, and you can have their names listed, and then how long they were on it for a year or two. Or you can list on the same page the current student members on that. So it's something that the students, even if they cycle off the project, they're recognized by the principal investigators having contributed, so they can use that as a link saying, yeah, I have, in fact, here's the evidence, I have worked on this project. So that's something that you can have, that you can do for the students. So what happens too if a project disbands or dies? So example, do you destroy student work after the project ends? That's a more dicier issue. My hope, and this comes into the whole area of preservation and digital preservation and archiving and web archiving and all that. Gee, do you really have to destroy the student's work? Is my question as a librarian, would be the first question. But after that, if you don't think it's worthwhile, it is possible that you can simply archive it locally and move forward from there. So, but it's kind of a dicey issue. Now, I'm talking about students who come into projects that are not work for hire. So if you hire a student under work for hire rules, then their work is automatically part of the project. So you don't need to get waivers or anything like that. So the materials are considered work product and are governed by your institution's intellectual property rules. So you still have to acknowledge that they have worked on that particular project. Most institutions enforce ownership of all copyright and licensing for student employees and staff. So thus, before you start your project, you may need to consult with your university legal office on an intellectual property waiver for possibly. So definitely you have to look at the work and the IP concerns moving forward. Now, what if you change institutions? Can your project come with you to the new institution? So sometimes yes, sometimes no. So the important thing is you should keep a copy of all intellectual property waivers, as well as a copy of the university policy and the results of any conversations with legal. So if you move institutions, you should file these with your new institution. So there's a dialogue between your former institution and your new institution. So there's no confusion as who has the IP rights moving forward. So moving forward with all these, it comes down to building your first work plan. So what do you have to do here? What's moving forward? What are the daily tasks that need to be done? So you have to list your itemized tasks, okay? You have to list the individual responsibility that goes with each task. You have to include a time element, and you have to include a deliverable or outcome element as part of this work plan. So you definitely want to use project management software at this point. So, Basecamp, Productive, using Gantt charts, Trello, Asana, for example, these particular items, just to name a few, all help you manage the various tasks of the various members within the project. So it's generally 4 steps. So you want to list every major objective, and then add the individual steps that must be completed towards that objective. Then step 2, for every task, you list who's responsible. You list them by team, you list them by person. So your project may have multiple teams, in which case you break it down by team and by person. By step 3, for every task, list the deliverable. How do you know a task is completed? Where does the completed work go when it's finished? And step 4, for every task, list the amount of time required from start to finish. And this is a really dicey one here, because how do you know until you do it, right? So if you're budgeting your time, so if you're looking at a short-term project, if you're considering a 40-hour work week, then 5% is going to be 2 hours, 10% is going to be 4, 20% is going to be 8, that sort of thing. So that's how you're going to have to break it down. So you're budgeting your time depending on how long you think the project's going to take. So a year-long project, maybe 40 hours per week times 50, that's 2,000 hours. And you can break it down by 5%, by 10%, by 20%. So what if I don't know how long something should take? That's a very important question. It's your best guess at this point. You can talk with other people who've done similar projects and ask them, how long does it usually take to scan 100 books, for example? And usually librarians might have an idea on that. So asking the right people may give you an idea of how long something will take. How many dependents will be having that you'll have on this particular aspect of the project as well? How complex is it? How many staff know about it? Is it something that's been done before somewhere else? So these sorts of questions will give you a good sense of how much time is going to be. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a good guesstimate. So there are ways to build a work plan. So you can use a simple work document. You can use Excel. There's a tree chart. There's a Gantt chart. So I mentioned the project management software before that you can use. Understanding that, as great as your plan may be, it works until it smacks into reality. So you have to be aware that you can't control everything. You can't control external factors, and you can't control personalities. There's just too many so-called balls in the air that can fall and impact your time frame. Another thing you need to consider is your scope change of your project. So you have to look at the requirement of the project change. Is it something that's evolving and you have to bring in new people and bring out new people, that sort of thing? Does the design development need to change? Is there new technologies that may be useful that can be brought forth? Are there changes in the mission that may impact your entire project? Are there changes in skills that you may have to address? Maybe a particular student who is very adept at one particular skill, cycles off the project. Now you have to go and find a replacement for that person. And then last, mission creep. And mission creep is insidious and it could impact you. For example, one of my projects that I worked on, we were supposed to do interviews, video interviews of a particular group in this community, which was great. We started doing that, but then we discovered that they had various interesting art and particular art project art. Oh, what do you call them? Elaborate dolls that were part of this particular community. And we said, wow, we could take photographs of these particular dolls. They're very interesting. So we started having that. So it started off from oral history, doing videos, to something that had combined a couple of other different items in that. So if you're doing photographs in addition to video, then you have to bring in a different set of standards and how you're going to present this material once you have it moving forward. So mission creep brings in a lot of other questions that you have not considered. So you always have to be careful of that. So baseline change, you're looking at your entire project, has the specifications of your project changed? The financial cost changes, has that occurred? Your resources, what resources do you have available now that you didn't before, or conversely, that you don't have available that you did before? If you don't have these particular resources available from the beginning, then you're going to have problems. What happens if partners cycle off your project and move on to other things? Can you get another partner to come in? And then there's also changes in the discipline or field that you're working in. So there's always a possibility your project may be superseded by someone else's project at another institution, for example. So you always have to ask yourself the question, when is change needed on my project? So if you're coming to these sorts of conclusions, then you need to take some hard steps. So when you aren't meeting deliverables, what you intended to have, whether it was a website or a scholarly article or what have you, when your team isn't working well together, personalities clash, when you have new or changing partners, that can impact you greatly. When resources disappear, when funders or stakeholders request change, that can always be a bit of a challenge as well. And then last, when your primary investigator isn't doing his or her job. So I've heard of situations where the project manager has told me that, yeah, we send stuff to the principal investigator and we don't hear back from him for like 3 or 4 months. And it's like, well, that's not good, So sometimes as a project manager, you have to put your foot down and say, okay, if we don't hear from you from this date, everyone's stopping work on the project. So you actually can have situations like that. So when a project becomes too painful, you want to identify the quickest route to completion. You want to remove all your extraneous meetings and work. You want to be upfront about what isn't working in the work plan and then move forward from there. So the next one is principles of budget design. So getting started, you want to go through, plan ahead, always refer back to your work plan, determine the maximum available dollars that's going to be spent on this project. Always double check your solicitations for specific requirements or limitations as well. Use a template if possible. And don't forget about indirect costs, printing out flyers, for example. It still costs, it still comes out of your budget, right? So you have to think about that. And last, you don't want to, don't be afraid to ask for help when necessary. So put a slide here together about salaries, if you're using a larger project, you're on a larger project, this sort of things you need to consider, salary figures, especially if you're doing multi-year, 3% cost of living, making sure you put the right people in the correct salary categories, and don't forget to include benefits as necessary. And of course, students, staff, and faculty have different salary needs, so you have to consider that as well. You have to consider everything from travel, material supplies, printing agendas, publication costs, publishing fees for project-related articles. All this sort of stuff is going to impact your budget, so you need to plan for it and track for it. As your web, if you're doing a web project, do you know the server hosting fees? Do you know what they're going to be a year from now, from 2 years, from 3 years? Where's that money going to come from? Even small equipment purchases like a 2 terabyte hard drive is going to cost you money, especially if you want to preserve doing oral history videos, and you want to make sure they're just not on your laptop, but they're on a separate hard drive, detachable hard drive. Then you have to balance that. Catering, room rental, that sort of thing. And also consultant fees or honorarias are also important. Charters, agreements, and handshakes. So you're going to be working with a lot of different people possibly, so you need to have different types of arrangements, as we say in the biz. So you got to put it in writing. The more partners in the project, the more you need to memorialize any agreements. So it's not that people are mean or malicious. It's not that. It's just that we're all busy, and we have to remind people that what their agreements were, what they chose to work on the project about, and that sort of thing. So often we forget our agreements and thus end up not delivering on them. So it keeps everyone honest in terms of what needs to be done and when it needs to be done. So to put it another way, if it's in writing, you can't ignore it. If it's in writing, others can't avoid it. And if it's in writing, there's hypothetically an even playing field for everyone. So for charters, you want to have a statement of shared values. What is that you're working for? What's the mission of this project? What is the statement of goals that you hope to achieve from this project? And then, what are the types of products that you expect to come out of that? So what are some of the rules? All the documentation, the citations, the attributions. So who's going to get, who's able to be a co-author on this particular project? Is it only going to be the tenured faculty have it, or is it going to be as well graduate students, and all that? You need to nail that, write it all out beforehand about who gets credit and attribution, publishing credit, communication, who's going to be responsible for communicating that your project's out there and all that. If you have more than one principal investigator, who's going to handle that responsibility? So, and you're talking more about the roles and responsibilities that everyone will have, as well as the appropriate behaviors that are expected from everyone. So agreements, what's access to resources? What access resources does everyone going to have or not have, depending on who they are? Access to staff, who gets access to that web developer, so to speak? What is the duration of access for? So these sorts of agreements need to be laid out. So while agreements can contain the same information as a charter, an agreement does not necessarily have to be signed by all parties within a particular project. So there is that difference. And of course, there's always the good old-fashioned handshake. So, be wary of untested partners who aren't amenable to formal agreements, even if only in email. So sometimes people may not be able to agree to something formally. So why is that? Be sure that when a project relies on a handshake, that if that handshake deal fails, the project can recover. So it's something to think about. Know when to use a handshake to avoid bureaucracy. And sometimes that's kind of neat. If you don't have to go through your university sponsorship office in order to bring money in, then that might be a good idea. So in short, having a basic understanding of human nature will serve you well. All right, so branding and marketing your project is the next thing. So you want to look at project names, logos, that sort of thing. Something's easily distinguishable. Can you get an acronym out of it? Should be identifiable to your audience. You can always run a Google search or a Google Scholar search on any project name and see if it's available out there. So project websites, while the URL for a project may be unique, think carefully about how many sites you're prepared to manage working forward. So who's going to maintain this project? Will you always have the time, money, or support to update it? And that's very important. Sometimes people finish a project and then they just walk away from it. And we all have seen those dead websites out there to live on in perpetuity until the link rot sets in. So other factors you may want to think of as well as, evaluating your team and, delays in resources and project documentation, storing your files, the final white paper that you need to write, and dissemination of results are all important. So what sort of problems are you going to run across when you work on some project like this? So I'm not saying you're going to run into all these problems, but you probably will run into some of them. So when projects attack, delays happen, hard deadlines are missed. You have to decide what you have to do to move forward, and then use your powers that be to move everyone forward to a better place with your projects. Be transparent with everyone. If you don't have enough money, be upfront about what you can do. Which deliverables will have the most impact. Those are your primary goals finishing up. Don't delay in identifying how to save money is basically the bottom line. So when your team members are unsuccessful, is it a personality thing, a knowledge thing? You always want to play to people's strengths moving forward. You never assume you understand what someone is going through unless you talk with them. So, communication is key. It's possible you could offer training or offer an opportunity to discuss whatever the problem is. And then at the same time, especially as project managers, you have to draw a line in the sand saying, if you don't get this done by this, then we're going to have to let you go, type of thing. And of course, in all honesty, you have to ask yourself whether you're the problem. Allow team members or principal investigators to suggest changes. Be clear that you're no longer useful in the project. You need to cycle off. You can discuss clearly your problems and issues and offer solutions. You can decide whether you still believe in the project and then act accordingly. But the thing you don't want to do is let it fester. So if it's time to move, then it's time to move. Now under grant funding, the last one here, different ways you can fund your project. So let me elucidate a few of these right now. So if you're applying for a grant, it's considered a statement of intent. You're writing the grant, so it's sort of a sales pitch, that contains a plan of action that demonstrates expertise and experience and offers a return on the investment. So, who will benefit beyond the project and the project team, for the funder, for the discipline, for the campus, for your campus, and for the public. So consider a grant that it's a risk and that it is public. It's an opportunity to test your team's understanding of its project and priorities. And it is, at the end of the day, a contractual obligation. So where can I go looking for money? Local first. You can look at internal grants via your department if you're in one. Sometimes departments will have small grants for students to work on a project. So you got to convince your dean or your department head the feasibility of your project. At Catholic University, we have the Office of Sponsored Programs and Research Services, and they have, again, small grants that they can give to you if your project is worthy. And you can also look at state humanities councils that can work on your project. So the particular project that I was working on out of Detroit, we ended up putting a grant to Michigan, and they actually ended up giving us $15,000 for a grant, for the grant, because they liked the project that we had. So you never know until you go out and ask. So different places that you can get grants. National Endowment for the Humanities, they gave out 152 million back in 2018 in these different areas, these divisions and offices. National Science Foundation, 8.3 billion. So you know where a lot of the government money goes. And these are various departments that they have. National Institutes of Health, 41 billion, and NLM, 441. So depending on what your project is, you want to find the appropriate grant funder. Another type of a way you can fund your project is through foundations. So these are common ones here. So the thing about foundations is that there's no peer review. The founder selects the funding for the project. So they can take a look at it and say, that's great, and they can fund it. Usually the grants, especially the government grants, they'll have deadlines that you have to meet by a particular date, and that's it. With many foundations, they're saying yes or no continually throughout the year. So when you're writing your grant, you want to consider these particular ideas, reviewing solicitations and guidelines, make sure that you're eligible, make sure that you put in the material on time, the grant on time, contact the program officer if you have any questions. So here's the required parts, everything from the list of participants, statements, innovations, the environmental scan, work plans, budgets, and all that. The data management plan has been very important the past few years, and letters of commitment, and what sort of educational materials that you can be working on. So the university coordinator, you can meet your coordinator before your first grant, on campus, and just have a conversation with them about how much, what they can do for you. At Catholic University, for example, they will, if you do get a grant, the university will take a certain percentage off the top. So if they need to manage stuff moving forward, they've got that money to do so. So that's something you need to consider as well when you go back and do your budget. You have to make sure that's there. So you have to consider, university processes, grants with subcontracts, all that. It's very important moving forward that, your final document has, 5 working days prior to the external deadline. So your university agents, if you will, can review your guidelines, your grant, and offer suggestions. So you always want to check your final grant submissions against what the rules of the competition are, competition is, and university rules as well. And then you always want to keep a copy of your grants, and ask for comments from the reviewers, regardless if you're successful or not. So you have to understand that grant processes have human variables, that they take as much time as you allow, that you give as much time as you can allow. People will wait until the last minute. Don't do that. Little things matter. Proofread your application. The IMLS CARES grant that was given out last year in 2020 because of COVID-19, they ended up having 1,700 grants, 1,700 applications, and they gave out 68. So that was less than 4% of applicants were successful. So it's something to keep in mind. So the secrets to winning, so have a compelling research question. Don't make it more difficult than it needs to be. Have a history of success. Always start small. Proof of concept project. Be realistic and be persistent in your work. So what comes next? So when a project ends, you want to thank everyone who's a valuable member of the team. You want to give public statements of value of team members and partners. And then you want to wrap up everything cleanly and provide copies to stakeholders, funders, and archivists, archives, and that sort of thing. So when a project trails off, and that does happen, you want to formalize your documentation. You want to bag and tag all those products you got. Then you want to create a succession memo should the project restart with new staff, and that has happened. And of course, when a project fails, admit failures, nothing wrong with that. Celebrate that you attempted the project, acknowledge your stakeholders, and then, possibly discuss trying again in the future. What did you do well? Celebrate that. I value your time in helping the project. Let people know. So what I recommend, I've got some templates here for project plans, and I'll send out a copy of the slides to everyone. Here, I would take some time and take a look at the different types of further questions that you can ask regarding working on particular digital scholarship projects. If you want to look at project videos, right here, you can take a look. Carnegie Mellon had request number of authors talk about their projects via video. So they're about 5 or 10 minutes long. You get a sense of the different types of projects and work that people can do out there. And then here are my sources for today's workshop. And I should add at the end, if you want to have a conversation beyond today, reach out to me. My email is gunn@cua.edu, and let's have a conversation. So that is my presentation. Does anyone have any questions? All right, then. Well, no questions. Then I guess we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much for coming today. Yes, please do come by for the others. I'd like to do a lot of range of digital scholarship workshops and a wide variety of topics. So yes, I invite you to all future ones moving forward. So thank you again, everyone, for coming, and do enjoy the rest of your day.